computer. All right, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. If you're catching it live, we have a few folks in the room, so thank you for joining us and listening. You'll be able to ask questions. Just go ahead and type them into the chat. I will get to them at the appropriate time, sometimes right away. But if we can't do that, we'll at least try to get to them by the end. So thanks again for joining us. I know I announced this relatively short. I ran into Ryan at the Pomona Reptile Expo, and that was a lot of fun. And he's always chatting about UV on Facebook, where I see him all the time. So I wanted to invite him on the show. So Ryan, thanks for coming on. I've seen me. Yeah, of course. So I've seen you on a lot of different channels promoting VivTech, the company that you started and run with your wife, Erica. And there's a lot of discussion about UV these days, UV light, and you were always more than willing to champion the use of UV light for all reptiles. So I'm really thrilled to have you on the channel. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so we'll jump right in because I think a lot of folks kind of know what to expect, what we're getting into today. So I feel like the more I read about UV light, the more I realize just how little I know. So what I want to ask you is, how can we expect someone with no experience whatsoever to be able to understand how to give it UV to their first pet, like a bearded dragon, leopard gecko, these common things that we first come across? Because I feel like this is something I've been reading for years and I hardly know where to start.
So realistically, we got to flip. The whole hobby needs a good scrub and a cleaning and a air out to dry and really get it looking nice again. We need to start looking at, realistically, I think, how we do this differently. The fact that we discuss whether an animal needs UV or not is kind of funny to me, because if you take a step back, we as humans have not existed that long. This hobby's been around for 30 years. Keeping a reptile in any kind of container is an idea that's existed for less than 100 years, pretty much, give or take. They've evolved for millions of years on a planet where we didn't exist to live on it. And we took them and we put them in captivity, and we're using artificial things to try and recreate their environment as best we can. And then you have people that are arguing about whether they need UV or not, like whether a monitor needs UV or not. Monitors have something in the top of their head called a parietal eye. For anybody that doesn't know what that is, it's an eyeball on the top of their brain that sees through a hole in the top of their head and subconsciously allows them to regulate their UV. I don't think that they would have evolved to have a third eyeball on the top of their brain to regulate a spectrum of light we can't even see if they didn't need it. And that's the big problem when it comes to the hobby, really, in general, too, is it's not just anthropomorphizing, it's the fact that as humans we have a difficult time understanding that our point of view is very different from anything else. And when you look at an animal's point of view, it's very, very, very different. So we really need to take a step back and look at, like, okay, how did these animals evolve? How did they live? What's their point of view of how they navigate their world? And then start creating that. Not, unfortunately, what we did is we went, okay, well, we want this animal and we have a box, so we're going to put it in the box. And then how do we make the box a little bit better than just a box?
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, through trial and error of killing things and things over time, we slowly kind of keep making things a little bit better. But if you remember back to when you were like a little kid and you caught like a toad or a lizard, the first thing you did, I grabbed dirt from where I found it. I grabbed sticks from where I found it. I made that thing look somewhere in my 8-year-old eyes, made it look like where I found it.
Mm-hmm.
And now I can go buy a lace monitor, and I bring it home and I stick it in a box and I go, it doesn't really need sunlight and it can just live on this stick.
Right.
Hopefully, and most of the time, and when I was doing Pomona, when you bring that to somebody and they think about it, and you realize that that's really what kind of happened in the hobby. That's how we got to where we're at. Like, it's kind of a little bit of an eye opener of what we've become. We were the MacGyvers of figuring out how to do these things and how to tweak something to make it a little better and a little better and a little better. And unfortunately, like that's kind of how it works with everything. All animals are kept in captivity. It kind of works that way. But I think at the point we're at now with technology and internet and social media and just like all the things that we have and the amount of information that can be moved around worldwide, there's so much better information out there, and there's so many ways to reach it. Like there's no excuse for MacGyvering things together anymore.
Hmm.
Like, and that's where kind of where, I mean, this is kind of all a big idea, like just where VivTech kind of falls in, and why you this kind of all comes back to UV. But like that's what we've really got to do, is start kind of thinking. I want to look at it, if we all took a step back and went, all right, I found this lizard outside and there was no hobby, how would you set it up? Well, you wouldn't take out the sun.
Right.
Like that's a major portion of what keeps everything on this big rock existing. So to cut it out of an animal's day to day and say I don't think they need it is honestly just super. There's a lot of really bad words that would describe it, but stupid's a good one. Like to think that like they've evolved over millions of years underneath that sun and they literally need it, and we know that, but I don't feel like they need it all the time.
So
Doesn't
what
make
is it? So I think let's going back to the idea that you talked about anthropomorphizing and seeing things from our perspective, right?
Yep.
And I think a big thing is, you mentioned it, is that the monitors in other lizards have a parietal eye on top of their head that can absorb it, but UV isn't something that we can see. So maybe that's part of the reason why it kind of feels magic to us, and a little bit magical thinking too. I know the kind of criticism is that it's a trend and that it's
Well, you know what?
like
I
they
can
kind of
show you.
lump
I
it in
can
the
show
same.
all
Yeah,
of
yeah.
you. I can prove it to all of you in one statement, in one thought, that UVA and UV is not a trend. Walk outside on a cloudy day that's rainy and crappy, and walk outside on a sunny day, and see if your mood changes when the sun hits you. That is the direct effects of serotonin development in your brain, which is caused by UVA. It's the reason that seasonal depression is a thing. And the lights that you can get to help with seasonal depression, don't tell anybody, they're UVA lights.
Mm.
That's what they are. So that is a direct effect that you can actually watch people have an issue with in our lives. It's just we can't see it. So you're right. And the other part of it too, go ahead.
No, all good. Yeah. So, because we'll get to that. I want to talk about UVA for sure. But for starters, if someone is still learning in about the light spectrum in general, like say they're not even in 8th grade, but even some of us who have graduated high school and college, we still don't even know what it is. What is UV light?
So all light. So this is what gets kind of crazy. So everything, man, this is all physics and it gets real crazy. Everything that exists around you is made up of waves of energy. Basically, to an extent. Light is a portion of that. Now, light is a very, very, very tiny sliver of this giant, infinite amount of nanometer, down to the tiniest wavelength, out to billions of miles for a wavelength. Like, it's a crazy amount of wavelengths that are out there that they all do different things. Now, in the wavelengths, there's wavelengths that we can see and that produce light, and that's what we see. There's wavelengths outside of that. They still produce light. They just don't produce a light we can see. So that's what UV is. So when you're looking at the visible spectrums of light available, like visible to any living thing, it's this big. We can see this much of it.
Mm-hmm.
So and that's where you're right. It does get hard, and it does get hard. That's also part of like where this was something that I don't know if I told you in Pomona, but I had this kind of like epiphany, I guess. It was especially with the lighting when it comes to UV, and like standard consumers not understand. You can't see it, so how do you know that your animal's getting it or needs it or uses it,
Right.
or that it's good or not? Like we can't tell. So like light bulbs. Why? Name one thing in your house, and I'm honestly challenging anyone to give me one thing, because I haven't thought of anything yet. No one else has. One thing that you throw away, even though it works exactly like the day you bought it.
Mm.
Anybody that can come up with anything, I legitimately would love to have an example so I can use it, but I can't find anything.
Yeah,
And
otherwise you're being wasteful. Otherwise, that you could say lots of it, but you'd be a jerk.
Well, not even that. It's just if it's not broken, it doesn't even take your attention. You wouldn't even think to replace it because it's working. It doesn't. But that's the thing. We're talking about it's working. The spectrum we can see is working.
Mm-hmm.
But the spectrum we can't see, that makes it a lot more difficult. It's also, there's even fight, and I know we're going to talk about this too, but there's even like arguments over UVA and UVB and which is needed, which is, more valuable or whatever. But like, it's, yeah, no, it's, we'll get there. They just all need it all the time. Like they live on this rock outside where it's all the time. So they need it. I promise. But,
I mean, that's when you think of it, if you want to take the planet and say you need three things to create life on the planet, and one would be air, one would be water, and the other would be heat, warmth and the energy that we get from the sun, right? Those, if you don't have any of those three things, life stops. Maybe what are they? The water bears will go on, but
right, that's it.
We don't have too many of those in the hobby.
Yeah, that's something where like they've been around for a long time. We just really need to understand. Man, I'm sorry, my brain is just, I hit a wall. My brain just shut off. I'm fighting through it, but I think I need caffeine.
Let me ask you this: what if we? So let's go back to that new beginner to the hobby.
Yeah.
And I want to learn. Okay, great, that makes sense to me. But again, I don't know anything about UV light because I'm just your average American consumer, right? I haven't studied physics, and everything you said about being on a spectrum of physical energy is too much for me to understand. So where do I go as a hobbyist? How do I learn that? How do I access it? How do I learn about it?
Honestly, there's not a lot of great places. There's like lighting groups on Facebook, but I'll be honest, they're also very biased. And there's a lot of within the hobby, and this is for anything. This is lighting, food, husbandry, everything. Everything that you do in the hobby, everything that you keep, every animal you keep, every temperature you keep it at, every humidity you keep it at, question where that comes from. Because there's entire portions of this industry that are now known as like bearded dragon diets.
Mm-hmm.
It's a standard. They eat 80% insects and 20% veggies as babies, and then as adults you flip it. Where in the world do you hit sexual maturity as a lizard and Disney magic comes out of the sky and turns the desert you live in into a tropical paradise where you can eat 80% vegetation? Doesn't happen. That doesn't exist. The reason that is what we do is because when they originally came into the country, people were feeding them so many mealworms and superworms that they were all dying of fatty liver. And all of it, when they were originally came in, these were thousands of dollars. So these breeders were losing their expensive animals, and there was a lot of nutritional issues. So the veterinary community tried to tell people, this is how you look at an animal's health. A lizard's health isn't based on how full its bowl is. It's based on their weights, what they need, nutritional, diet, variety, all of this. And they went, that's not easy. It doesn't fit with the I eat dinner, and then I give my bowl of dog food to my dog for dinner, and I give a bowl of food to my lizard for dinner. And that's the mentality they had. So veterinarians said, well, yeah, they're omnivores. So later in life, they just eat lots more lettuce because there's no calories and it's empty. And you'll stop killing your animal with fat stuff if we just convince you to feed it less fat stuff. And that's all. If you actually look at the wild diet of bearded dragons, 10% of its vegetation, the only time it's higher than that is within 2 months of the rainy season.
Right.
And then it's only up to like 30%. So vegetation is not a huge part of their diet, but that's part of the hobby, and that's part of something that everybody knows as a standard, but it's totally based on a complete lack of trying, not actual science or evidence or a reason. It's literally that piece of husbandry that we know is made because people are too lazy to learn how to understand animal health. And instead, this was what we did.
And so this is a piece of advice that solved a problem, right? That we just didn't understand quite the extent, because these lizards were getting sick and shortened lives and that sort of thing. And so they just kind of put them on an extreme diet, and they said, well, this works, so problem solved.
Yep. Exactly.
And I think there's so much in the hobby that goes that way. This works, we're done, anything else is wrong. And it becomes these rules. And you hear, I want to do an episode one day of just breaking of every reptile rule that you break, which is every single one of them. I think the one universal rule is don't use a heated rock in your, one of the little bearded, the pet store rocks that they sell.
Yeah, the hot rocks.
Yeah. Otherwise, like all the all the rules are meant to be broken at some point once you know. So it felt like you're kind of saying, not do your own research, but do your own critical thinking and examine the natural history of the animal. So how does UV play into that? I think that's another problem too. Is people have asked me, for my snakes, well, what good do you see out of it? I don't know. What benefits does UV have? And we'll get into snakes, but for all reptiles, like what are the benefits that it does provide?
Not dying is a huge benefit.
Yeah.
That's number one. Now, there are animals that can survive without access to UV lighting. I also want to point out that everyone watching, I can shove you in a closet and feed you paste through a tube and never let you out, and you will be alive.
Mm-hmm.
Technically. There's a very big difference between being alive and being healthy and thriving. Also, I'd like to point out, just because it's a pet peeve of mine, just because an animal's breeding has nothing to do with its health. Passing on genetic material is a basis of an animal's existence, and an animal will attempt to become pregnant or gravid at sacrificing its own life if it believes that it can pass on genetic material. So anybody that says, well, only a healthy animal will breed, you have no idea how animals work whatsoever.
Well,
because if that's the case, then please tell that to every child protective service dealing with meth addicts and homeless and that stuff. Because I know a lot of healthy people who have babies. A lot of unhealthy, should barely be alive people.
Yeah, no, I mean you're exactly right. And I don't want to compare animals to people too much, but right. I deal with the public, and it's wow, that family has that's a family, and they didn't come from ideal situations where all their needs are met for sure. But so not dying is a good benefit. What other what other benefits can we expect?
So UVB, obviously, most people see UVB. They when we talk UV in a reptile sense, we talk UVB, and we'll just get this one right out of the way right away.
Well, that's the only one anyone measures too.
Exactly. So UVB, what UVB does is UVB ranges from 296 to 345 nanometers, or 300 and I feel like that's not the right number, but it's somewhere in there. Anyway, you guys don't need the specific nanometers. It's on the internet. Go look it up. But,
it has been a long day for you, right?
I have not been on a phone call for 9 hours, and I went to bed at 4 a.m. So
okay,
you're getting the fumes here, but I got you. Just bear with me if I sputter a little. No, but yeah. No, so for UVB, that's the standard. That's what we all know. UVB is necessary for vitamin D3 synthesis, which is used in order to metabolize calcium in reptiles' bodies. Calcium is used within their bones, their neurological systems, and enormous parts of their biology. So without it, they slowly take calcium out of their bones, and eventually they die. So without UVB, there's a ton of animals that will die without it. But there's a lot that won't die without it. So UVB, when we're talking about all other animals, nocturnal. If you say that word to me in public, I will slap you. There's no nocturnal reptiles. There's nocturnal frogs. Nocturnal reptiles, I mean, you're gonna have to have a pretty good argument on that one, because there's no heat gradient at night, and they all bask during the day, even if it's cryptic basking, and they're all crepuscular at best. Anyway, if let's just say we're talking about those though, the hobby might not like it, but science is about 80 years ahead of us, and there's already enormous amounts of research on all of these different species. That corn snakes use UV, ball pythons use UV, Massasauga rattlesnakes use UV to synthesize D3. All of them use UV. Imagine that snakes that bask out on rocks in nature underneath the sun utilize that light wave like the other pieces of the families that they're all a part of.
And so they get that they use that the UVB to turn sunlight into calcium, essentially. Obviously there's one or two more steps in between that, but
a little more complicated than that. Yeah. It's a little bit less than it's not quite like going to the soda machine and putting in your UV and getting out your calcium. It's a little more complicated, but there's a biological process that goes through that. But UVB equals calcium.
Why is it that some people then will tell me that, so obviously that's important because calcium, that's how our nerves fire, that's how our muscles contract. And so it makes sense that if our nerves can't fire and our muscles can't contract, we'll take the calcium from our bones, and I could see all kinds of problems, right? But how is it then that an animal like a snake and monitor, like, where did these misconceptions come from that people said that you don't have to provide it? That why is it that they're different from other animals where everyone has always known that you need it?
Yeah, well, honey, there's 2 orders sitting over there. They're signed up. You got to fill them. No, so the reason is because of what I was saying earlier. They don't die without it, and that's our standard. Well, I don't give it to my snake, and my buddy didn't give it to his snake, and the person that breed him, he didn't give it to his snake. And we have 10 generations of snakes that don't see UV, and they're all fine, so they don't need it. And that's our rationale. Now, again, they're not wrong. They don't need it to physically be alive. They do use it for so much stuff. They use it for calcium. They use it, the UVB, but the UVA, and we'll get into that in a second. You cannot supplement anything to do what UVA does. I can supplement vitamin D3. I can give my snake, during the summer, I can take him outside for a couple times during the summer, maybe an hour, whatever. And you can get them some UV. You can get them the D3 they need. Realistically, they can survive without it.
And they get it from their prey too, right?
And they do get D3 from their prey, but again, that comes down to if the prey is right. Whole prey items technically have D3 in them if that prey item had a very nutritious, varied diet that allowed them to store large amounts of D3 in their body. If they didn't have that, like if they were crickets that were fed potatoes, or if they were, rodents that were fed whatever random keep them alive rodent lab block that's not made for nutritional feeders, it's made to make more rats. Like, we got to think about that stuff. There's a possibility they may not be getting as much of it in their diet as they need. And things like Komodo dragons. Who doesn't love Komodo dragons? What about, you're talking about the biggest beast monitor that exists. The thing takes down whole cows. Like, it's a beast of a lizard.
It's a dinosaur.
They cannot function without UV. If they don't have UV, they don't have enough D3 in their diet, they will die. So all zoos, if you go to zoos and you see Komodo dragons, all of them have outdoor exhibit areas they can get to because it's incredibly necessary, or they die. Like, they can't get enough of it into their body.
So not even just the lamps they're using natural. They need access to natural sunlight.
Yeah. So like inside they're going to be giving them lamps and things, but they've got to pump them. You've got to hit them with a lot of it. They got to be able to get enough UV to for a big animal like that to absorb all the everything that it needs and synthesize all the D3 that it needs. And it's a little bit more of a problem in wild Komodos just because they don't eat the whole prey all the time. So you're talking about, that's kind of what we were talking about with the prey. It really depends. Like, it also depends. Like, if I feed frog legs, that's different than a whole frog. If I feed, there's a lot of things that can change the nutritional look of something. And with Komodos, like, if they eat more whole rodents in captivity, they do better than wild ones that eat like their natural prey, because they're always getting a little bit of something versus depending on the diet. So but that was a species of varanid that very quickly was very evident that they needed UV. So they're one that can't live without it. Like, you can't do good enough without it.
And that seems to be a trend too, is that there's some animals that will absolutely die without it. And some that it goes to the point where even people so much as say that they don't need it, and I never give it, and you shouldn't give it because it's a bright light and it's harmful. So why is there such a difference? Why are there some animals on one end of the spectrum that absolutely require it, and others where it's controversial even to suggest it?
So we're talking about two different things. There's one side of the spectrum where there's animals that have a high UV need, and I'll tell you why. And then there's the other side of the spectrum you're talking about, people who say the animal doesn't need it. That part of the spectrum is because they're stupid and they aren't critical thinkers, but all of you are critical thinkers and understand that all living creatures that live out in the wild on the earth have access to UV light. So over the millions of years since before we were here, they probably and maybe evolved ways to use it. even though since the 1940s, there's scientific documentation talking about it. 40 years before the hobby existed. Like, they knew this. We just don't do it because the reality, if you tell me that you don't do UV because your animal doesn't need it, it's because you just don't want to do it. It's an added expense. They don't need it to be alive. And that's your reason for keeping that animal, is to just have it not be dead. I try to do more than not dead with my animals. I try to push my standard up a little higher than that. And you really need to provide them with that. Then, and the part of it with to an extent, and I'm not saying it's neglect or abuse, but I do think that it's incredibly unfair and incredibly messed up to keep most animals away from UV. In some situations, I understand, like in massive breeding facilities where they have 5,000 snakes, giving those access to UV with the technology that's available right now, including the LED stuff right now, is we're not in a position where we can do that. And to put those all in large cages would make it impossible for the industry to be available, to exist. So as long as those people are doing the best they can, where they can, we understand that you have to take some leeway somewhere if we want to have the industry we have. But anybody who has less than 100 reptiles, find every way you can to have UV on them. I've tried a bunch of different ways. Currently, this wall does not have, this is all my snakes, doesn't currently have UV. And it's because we had tubes in there originally, and it heated the enclosures up too much, and I was having too much of a problem with the snakes messing with them, so I didn't like it. So I've got some other options I'm working on, but they're not ready, and there's nothing else available in the hobby that exists in the industry at all. So I get it. I don't blame people for not having it, but when you can, everything over here all has it. Everything that I can mount it in has it. So realistically, what you're talking about when you're talking about the UVB and why it's important, calcium and the biological processes, and they die. Some animals die without it. Those animals that die without it, the reason is because generally they come from areas that are incredibly sun intense, desert areas, Caribbean island. It's funny when I talk to people and I talk about the types of reptiles that have the highest UV needs, and we all talk desert. Everything that has high heat, high UV need is a desert species. Do you know where the highest UV needing animal in the world lives?
It's on the tropics.
Exactly. It's in the Caribbean. It's on the Caribbean islands.
I mean, that's literally how they measure it, right? It's the equator. It gets the most sun all year. It makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, and not even that. It's not even just that. Like, it's the fact that like Cyclura live on white sand beaches with no cover, and they sit out there at noon, at like 2:00 in the afternoon in July. Like, the only way they could get more UV and get hammered more constantly is if Jamaica was 5,000 feet higher.
Yeah.
That's about it. So they really get pounded. But as they've evolved, their skin has gotten thicker to help them avoid burning and overproducing and things like that. They've evolved to handle that environment. When we bring them into captivity, we're using outputs that aren't nearly as strong as the sun is. So we need to continuously hit those animals with constant UV for them to absorb the little bit that they need. If you don't supply them with it, those animals have evolved in environments that are so incredibly UV intense that they use it in their systems, and it's imperative to their systems and to their biological processes. So there's species like that are more affected by it than others are, but every single species I've found papers on that they've done a test to see if they utilize UVB, everyone does. Like, there's not everyone. I can't remember the species. There was one that said it wasn't, but it wasn't really conclusive. But even like banded geckos, there's a study on banded geckos, Texas banded geckos, animals like that they say don't need UV. They just don't need as much. And even in the wild, a banded gecko is pretty crepuscular, potentially even nocturnal if you're talking Arizona in the summer. They don't really come out because it's 115 degrees. So part of their life is pretty nocturnal. But during the day, they come up to the edge of the hole and they stick their tail out or their foot or just like from here down on their face. So they just have a little bit. And 15 minutes of that much coverage is the same thing as a bearded dragon on a rock for an hour. So that's a very, very big difference. So those animals have thinner skin and they're able to utilize that UV easier. and they're able, and because they don't always have as much access to it, and they haven't evolved to sit in the sun all day all the time. They've kind of evolved. They still use it, but they don't need it as much. It's the same thing with us. We do to use it. We actually synthesize D3 with UV as well. That's the one thing. If I could just get people to understand that you guys do the same thing that the lizards do, even with UVA. We can't see it, but it affects us in a lot of the same way it does lizards and other things. So the fact that that stuff affects us is a normal thing that we'll accept, but then we argue of whether it affects every one of them. What's the argument then? Like, if it doesn't have any negatives, it can't hurt your animal. It can't hurt to add it unless you really screw up. And it can only provide a benefit. What's your argument? And it kind of comes on that for me, but yeah. But the reality really is, when we want to talk about like some of the big problems and why people don't, or like some of the big things that you're missing, is what we were saying we got to talk about, really kind of dig into, is the difference in UVA and UVB. Mm-hmm. That's where a lot of what I'm talking about starts to really shine.
That reminds me of, I lived in Chicago for 1 year, and we were talking about this a little bit before we came on, and now I live in the LA region, and it's different. That 1 year I did in Chicago, that winter, it was really, really, really cold, and that took some getting used to, but I got used to it and I got over it. But what I just couldn't accept, and like what my body really craved, was just that warmth and that heat and that sunlight. And just because it's not only is it not hot, and it's not like today I'm in t-shirts. I just walk my dog in t-shirt. It's fine, no big deal. It's warm out. But the sun is all.
My eyes will freeze shut if I go outside. I don't know if that makes sense to some people, but your eyes can crystallize while you walk.
Yeah, it was like that in Chicago. I remember when I had a big lump of snow in my beard at one point. I thought that just happened on TV, but it happens at home if you live in the wrong place. But anyways, you could feel that difference, and it's noticeable, and there's no correcting it. And I think that's the big difference. Do we want our snakes to be, or our reptiles to be, even if they survive without it, do we want them to feel that way, to have that sort of just sort of oppressive lack of natural production of serotonin and other things, but or do we just want to give it to them and give them a happier life? Like, was I happier in LA than Chicago? I don't know, probably. Was it just sunlight? Tough to say, but can we do better? What harm does it do to offer it?
And that's the thing that kills me, is it's the UVA thing. And I think the reason that we focus more on UVB is because without UVB, some animals just die.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. You can see the difference as they slowly die, and it's well documented, and it's a thing, and we know it.
So UVA, what is UVA? How is that different?
So UV is broken up into 3, 4, depending on who you ask, sections. We'll talk about UVA, B, and C. UVC is what's used in sterilizers. It breaks down biological material. That's bad. That's completely filtered by our ozone, so we don't get any of that. But we do use it in medical and even in sterilizers for fish tanks, things like that.
So it comes from the sun, but it bounces off the ozone layer, so it doesn't end up on our skin. Yep.
So then you get into UVB, and not all UVB is good either. Shortwave UVB is also called non-terrestrial UVB, which the ozone also reflects back out and filters for us. That's what causes skin cancer. And that's what'll cause a lot of, like, in 2008, there was a bunch of UV bulbs that had issues, and animals' eyes were getting photokeratitis, and animals were dying from it. That was directly because that short frequency wavelength was being projected, or the phosphor in there wasn't blocking that wavelength. So that's bad. Well, then you get into the section of UVB we know about, that's good. And then you get into the section of UVA, and that runs right up into the violet spectrum of where we can see. So UVA is what touches what we can see. It's right outside of our limit. And what UVA does, have you ever seen any pictures of like how a bee sees a flower and how we see a flower?
Yes.
That's UVA. That's them showing you how a bee sees UVA. Reptiles see that too. So if you've ever seen that, and for anybody who hasn't, you're looking at what we see as a pink flower, and what they see is yellow with black racing stripes and red spots. It looks nothing alike. The only way you know it's the same picture is because of the shape of the flower. Like, it's that drastic in some cases. And if you think about that, think about an animal that can see that would be like taking out, you're basically taking out a section of light that they can see. You're causing them to be colorblind.
Mm-hmm.
So that would basically be if I took out half of your visual spectrum and all you could see were reds and yellow tones, and no blue, no purple, no nothing like that. Like that's what we're doing. And when it comes to that, then you start to think, okay, well, think about some of the foods you love, like really beautiful. Think of a fruit basket. Think of a gorgeous fruit basket.
Yeah.
How colorful and pretty and appetizing that is. Now, what if you see it and it's just brown and gray?
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to be like, there's a lot of stuff that goes into UVA with birds and how they're picky with their food and even stuff like that. So one, they can see it. So you're cutting out an entire section of light they can see and color they can see that they react to totally differently, including a lot of the, it's kind of hard not to keep adding on to this, but like just how cool it is that they can see this. All of the studies that we're seeing posted on Facebook about bioluminescence in reptiles and geckos and lizards and things like that, it's not bioluminescence in the idea of like bioluminescent algae where you can dive in and it glows. Right. It's bioluminescence in the fact that if you hit it with the right wavelength, it glows green or blue. Mm-hmm. And we can't see that wavelength unless we shoot it out of a flashlight and we using the right things, we can see, make it happen to where we can see it. Yeah. They can see it all the time. So like panther chameleons, the bony tubercles in their face, the males and females have different facial outlines. Those bony tubercles glow neon green to them. They look like they're in the movie Avatar. Like they glow and they see all these colors and shapes. So we can't see that. So if we put two males together, they can see a male and a female. A male and a female can see each other from a tree apart. Mm-hmm. And we can't tell if they're a boy or a girl until they're like right here. And we're, really looking. Yeah. So that's something that think about how that would change the aspects of your life if you could, just the things that they pick up on, little dune geckos that live in the African desert, but they're this big and they can see each other 100 yards away. How does something that big on sand see something else that's the same color as the sand and that big 100 yards away? Makes sense if it also kind of glows neon green to them. Yeah. I've heard too that the blue tongue skink, that the defense mechanism, that it also works, it kind of reflects UVA and it will flash a bird that's charging it or something like that. Is that, have you heard that? A lot of those colors and things that animals do, if you look at them under a black light is similar to a UV light. So look at ball pythons, all the blue-eyed leucistics. If you put them under a black light, you can actually see different patterns of other morphs that may be underneath there because you're refracting a different light spectrum. So they're doing the same thing. So a blue tongues that makes complete sense to me and always has, that under UV light and the way these animals, including birds who can also see UV, that would look drastically different to them. Yeah. Because it kind of cracked me up the first time I heard it when I was a kid, that's what they did to scare predators away. Right. I was like, that's what Michael Jordan does when he dunks a basketball, which is, for some of our viewers, that was LeBron James before. The old LeBron. Old LeBron. But so just the idea that happened. And then once someone told me that it's reflecting light and is basically like a flashlight out of his mouth, I was like, well, that is freaky. Right. Well, here's the thing about this. So they can see UVA. There's a study recently that came out that shows that there's a really close correlation between UVA that snakes might actually use and other reptiles might use their sight of UVA concentrations to find basking spots, not heat, which is insane for animals that also evolved heat sensors on their face to not use them. But if you remember back when the snake ban came through, the first Lacey Act snake ban happened, there was people who were, and the USGS report came out and it was saying how snakes could live all the way up into New York. And there was a guy who, I remember this video, I'll never forget it, because he took his 12-foot albino berm, set her by the back door, opened up the French door to 6 inches of snow, and she just went whoop right out onto it. And I could never understand. I'm like, you guys, you can't expect these things to survive. Look how stupid they are. Yeah. It can see infrared like Predator, and it still went out to die. So that never made sense to me until I saw that paper. And if you think about it, if they use UV concentrations to find their basking spot,
Yeah.
what is the most reflective surface they could possibly ever see?
A big
Crushed
backyard full
white
of snow.
Yep. That would have looked like the most amazing concentrated basking spot ever, which
And
would have made
especially,
perfect sense why that snake would have been like, yup, right out the door.
yeah, especially while he's cold.
Yep.
It's like, oh, this seems like it should be right. Yeah.
Yeah. So think about that. Like now, if we think about, okay, now UVA concentrations might be how your snake finds its better basking spots, or adding more serotonin to the brain with UVA is going to change their natural behaviors. You actually start seeing really, really, really cool behaviors out of your animals. Amazon tree boas are barely in arboreal snake in captivity because they don't get UVA. Their brain is just lazy and they don't do anything, and they sit there and they're basically depressed all the time. You should never have to wake up an Amazon tree boa to feed it. Like the thing senses your fear when you walk up to the cage. You shouldn't have to wake it up. Like, and I did that. I did this an anecdotal thing when I had them years ago. I put UVA on 6 babies or UV on 6 babies and not on the other 6. Huge difference. The 6 babies without UV stayed on the bottom like they always do, hid in the back in the corner, usually under a cork or in a pile of moss or whatever. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they would climb, maybe at night, but that was about it. The ones with UV, all 6 of them were up on a perch watching me all day. Every time I walked past, they moved, they watched. They all ate without a problem. They all acted like an Amazon should. Like when you go down to the rainforest to find Amazon tree boas, you don't pick them up off the ground.
Right.
You climb. Like Stoney made a 30-foot tall hook for some researchers that were doing Amazon research for a reason, because that's where you got to get them. But then in captivity, they don't even like to climb on the sticks. It's because of that. When you start to understand how UVA affects the mentality and the way that they think, and they're just think about it like I'm not saying it's the same thing as our happiness and what we perceive as happiness, but it uses a lot of the same chemicals that allow us to not feel stressed, not feel anxious, not feel, tense, that allow us to feel more normal. Having a higher serotonin amount in your brain allows you to feel happy, allows you to be more natural.
And reptiles have serotonin too.
Exactly. And UVA has a direct correlation to serotonin development. It's directly related to serotonin development in their brain. That's the same thing. Seasonal depression. Everyone that lives in the state of Washington all has that. That's because they don't get UVA. We all see it in people. We know it's a thing. It happens in reptiles. It's the same thing. They just don't smile or wear chain metal necklaces and listen to emo music. Like they're not going to tell us they're all upset. And what we're perceiving as upset, we're not realizing that we can't talk to them. So we're trying to perceive what they're doing in a way that we feel is normal. But what you're looking at is a snake that's not getting up and not moving and not doing anything. And that's not normal. But we get used to it because that's how they always are. So that just must be how they should be. Mm-hmm. But it's not. It's because you're taking an animal that hasn't seen pieces of light. It needs to feel normal. Like imagine if for a year you basically got into the worst depression you've been in and you couldn't get out, and that's it. That's it. And that's what we do. We just leave them like that. And I don't think it's not because, people are like, we hate them or stick them in this box and never love them.
Of course
not.
But
it's because of the insane amount of misinformation and the insane amount of just trying to make the hobby easy to get more people into it. We oversimplified it to the point where we need to get people to understand, okay, it's easy to keep reptiles, but you still have to know stuff. Like, I wish we could get reptile to the point where marine tanks are saltwater. Like if I come up to you and I'm like, dude, you should start a saltwater aquarium. I don't care if you have 500 freshwater aquariums at your house or if you've never kept a fish in your life. The response from anyone is, no, that's hard.
No,
and
thanks.
Takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
Yep. Because that hobby made it a stigma of it's amazing and it's beautiful and it's this incredible accomplishment. But you're not going to go to your local Petco and just plug in a box and it's going to work. You have to know what you're doing. You literally have to mix up the salt they live in. Like, so, and we could, but at the same time, they still have like Coral Life has their BioCube that made entry-level saltwater keeping so much easier for people. Like there's ways we could do that. We could make we could add that almost stigma of like, hey, they're amazing. It's incredible. Anyone can keep it. Anyone can do it. They work well in your house, in your pet, in your life. It wouldn't change the way we keep them at all. But we need to change the idea around how we keep them. So it's not going to stop people from wanting to keep them. We just can't go. We've gone from going so easy to now we want to push people to almost scientific.
Right.
And we need to walk them back slowly. And that's
right.
like some of the stuff I'm trying to work with. I don't know if I told you this in Pomona, but like with VivTech, what I want to do is I want to put the knowledge that we all have into the stuff that we make so that those people can be successful without having to be scientists for it. And then we find ways to slowly innovate to pull them back in. Like we're working on an app, and part of that eventually is going to have a quiz where like a quiz game in it where you can win points, and your points get you coupons for stuff off or free swag, or I'm just going to incentivize you to learn about your own pet. Like, but that's the thing. Like nobody cares to do that. And the big companies just don't do. Oh, I wish like the amount of money that's available for some of those bigger companies to do something really incredible, and they just don't. So
well, it's really reminded me for a brief moment. I worked for Tesla. I was selling solar roofs, and one thing that Elon Musk said, and like him or love him, you know, he's got a lot of quotes I don't necessarily agree with, but one thing that he said that I thought was really resonant was that he said our company has a goal, and that goal is to change the world. He says, but we're not going to do it as a nonprofit, because if you really want to change the world, it has to be profitable, because no one will take it seriously if it's not making money. And so, for instance, you look at right or wrong, you know, Kevin McCurley writes this book on ball pythons that revolutionizes the way that the average keeper can access ball python knowledge and their collections. And now there's racks everywhere across the country of just racks and racks and racks. And this isn't what this topic is about, whether or not they can be good or bad.
It's
but
same general thought.
But that becomes adopted as the industry standard because, frankly, it worked. And it produced a lot of ball pythons. So is there a benefit? Is there some way that using UV light is going to actually increase? Is it beneficial for a snake breeder to use UV? Like, bottom line, what's in it for me to use it besides just saying my animal's happier?
I'll be honest, there's two things that we're completely screwing up in this hobby, and it's nutrition and lighting, period. Without those two things, every animal we have is living in suboptimal conditions. They're unhealthy in so many different ways. It's just a lot of ways that aren't easy for us to measure in a way that the average person will understand. You literally would have to go do a lot of research and understand the animals on a level that most people don't. So we need to understand that. And yeah, man, dude, I lost it. What were we talking about?
How can we use this to make more money?
There we go.
So how can we use better science to make more money?
So really what it is we just need to show people what it does. And as we show this, like the VivTech so far, do you know how hard it's been to look at somebody and go, your crested gecko and your ball python, who somebody has told you for the entirety of this hobby doesn't need UV, actually do. And you should also buy this LED, and it's also $90.
Yes.
But the difference is that we're honest about what we're doing. I'll be honest too. Like what I'm doing, this is not by far the best I can do. Well, it's the best I can do right now, but it's not the end of what we can do. The sky is the limit, and I'm working on stuff right now. I'm hoping my goal is to replicate the sun, period. The entire output, reduced, but track it identically.
Careful, Icarus.
I'm gonna do it. but it's gonna take me a bit. But we all just have to keep doing what we can to keep doing better. And this, as long as like these bulbs, as long as everything we bring forward has the proof in it. Like I can show you. There's people that can show that come up to me at shows that have bought the bulbs and are like, you know, I wanted to try it. I like the LED, all the things that I said, but then they're like, then I took it home and my animal acts completely differently now. Like all of these guys back here. These 3 cages are peacock monitors.
Uh-huh.
They're Varanus Offenbergi. They're incredibly shy, and they never come out ever. It's past their normal basking time, but I have about 20 of them, and in a month, if I physically see 5 of them, might even be the same one 5 times.
Mm-hmm.
That's impressive.
Okay. Very reclusive.
Incredibly shy. Yes. They bask, now that they're all under these, all of them bask all day between 10 and 2. I can walk up to the cages without them freaking out. And for the first time in 8 years of working with this species, I tongue fed one.
Mm-hmm. After 8 years.
8 years. That's the only thing I changed. I have animals I've worked with. This pair, one of the pair in the middle, actually, I raised from babies. I still can't get a picture of them unless I literally take them out and handle them, because I can't get close enough. I couldn't. I can now.
And were they?
The only thing I changed.
Were they on a linear UVB before?
They were on. They were on fluorescence. Yeah.
And so just adding like more of a spotlight is what it changed their behavior.
It's the difference. Actually, what changed their behavior with this one is, with the LEDs, and again, we're talking about a ton of different stuff, and I don't want to just make this a VivTech thing, but
yeah,
LEDs, the UVB is amazing. It's just like a lot of the other UVB that's out there. What's different about the LEDs and what's making the big changes in the animals, the UVA spectrum that our LEDs give off. So when you're looking at the spectrum of UVA, most bulbs, fluorescent phosphors block wavelengths of light. You want to block out. So in the UVA, they let some pieces through, but not all of it. What comes through is like you have all the different nanometers, and you have nothing, nothing, nothing. And then maybe for 3 nanometers, it's a huge spike. And then nothing, 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 and then another huge spike. But hormonal changes in the animals, serotonin development in their brains, the frequency at which they actually see their environment, and we don't even know that completely on how they see it, because I don't think we have a good way to test it. But just how much they can see and what they can see is in there, but it's all different chunks and they all do different things. And with most fluorescents, you're not getting all of it. You can turn on one of these LEDs and animals will react immediately. One of my monitors turned, looked at it, walked across the cage the second I flipped the switch. He had fluorescent in there too. I've never put a fluorescent bulb on an animal and seen a huge difference in their behavior. I've just seen them not get dead. You know what I mean? Like, you don't see a difference. If you don't put it on a bearded dragon, it dies.
Right.
If you do put it on, he just still exists like he did any other day, really.
Yeah.
He just doesn't die. With these lights and the UVA spectrum that it's putting out, it's changing their behavior because we're changing the chemical compositions of their brain by allowing them to have more serotonin. We're seeing hormonal changes in young males that are going into breeding behaviors and starting to. I had a chameleon breeder call me he had a young male that was 3 months, at least 3 to 4 months from being breedable. And he goes, I put that light on him, he turned neon blue, and he's head bobbing at every male and female in the entire room. He called me. That was him calling me. That was an instant change. He saw it within 20 minutes of changing the bulb.
That's immediate. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So that's where, like, this kind of stuff, pushing people to do better, pushing UV, when we do stuff like this, it gets easier because people are seeing the difference. And when you can see it, it's like this is what kills me with UVA and UVB. And I've made this comparison. It's like medicine and like people who have disabilities. If someone parks in a disabled parking spot and they get out of their car and they're totally walking in fine, they're harassed. People think they're lying, whatever, because of a disability in the US means you have a physical thing wrong with you and I can see it. And that's why we don't give a lot of weight to mental illness and mental health and all of that. That whole thing comes around to everything that we do. It's the same thing with UVA and UVB. UVB is you are in a wheelchair, and UVA is every other mental and illness that doesn't show physically.
That's I think that's a good example. And it's, even though it's something we can't see, clearly the reptiles see it. And that's, I don't know. I think there's hardly any better argument for it than that, is just being able to see a visual reaction. And I have the lights off now because it has a bad glare, but my Brazilian rainbow boas will hang out underneath it. My reticulated python hangs out directly underneath the bulbs almost every day. He really is a sun lover, but it's clear that some of these animals take it, and they take it in different ways. And it's I don't know, you could just tell the difference in terms of choice of where they choose to hang out based on whether or not they have it or not. So that's really cool. And I know we talked a little bit too on Instagram about our feeders and insect, because you even notice the grasshoppers, and I've read anecdotal posts about people who breed grasshoppers who provide them a light cycle and UV as well, and because they say like, oh, I can't get it to reproduce properly without a light cycle. And so yeah, you have grasshoppers on light, right, on UV?
Age of grasshoppers, and oh, here, I think Erica posted it. You can actually, they're not doing it right now. They all just molted. But like, this is the UV is the dimmer one in the back.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, I took a picture when I turned it on the one morning. None of them were under the heat light, and all of them were clumped under the UV.
I did see that. Yeah,
50 of them. Yeah. Yep. That was. Oh yeah. That. So yeah, she posted that.
Yeah.
I was like, this is kind of funny, and it's like, think about an insect that would be more adapted to using UV than a grasshopper. I can't. That they live on the grass in the daylight all the time. They don't hide. They don't. What makes them an awesome feeder? They don't hide or burrow, and they're out all the time. Also, what makes them something that, imagine that, utilizes UV light.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we, like you said earlier, and obviously we could probably spend hours on that as well. But just the nutrition that we give our reptiles, there's so little we put into it, because, I mean, they tell us, snakes in particular, and they said it about monitor lizards, you don't need UV because they're eating whole prey and they get it from the brains and the livers of the mice that they eat. Well, what if this mouse is living in a black plastic bin? It doesn't even have a wheel to run on. Like,
its food is cardboard and molasses and dog food.
Yeah, how quality is the nutrition that it's getting? Is that what is this the panacea fix to UV light that we're giving to our snakes, is these nutritionally deprived rodents? So I wish they would apply that, saying, we could take it to the next step and have the super rodent feeders that are supplied with UV and all the perfect vitamins. And
so I'll say this here for you guys. Even if you post it, whatever. I'm working with somebody, like, the two biggest problems in herpetoculture and husbandry is nutrition and lighting, period. I'm attacking the lighting first. That's why VivTech launched lighting first, because I have well, I'm gonna tell you why I didn't go after nutrition first, because I sort of have a hidden secret for that. But I went after lighting first because that's where my passion is, and I know that's one of the worst places. Well, the other part is nutrition. So as much as I know about lighting, this guy knows 100 times more than that nutrition. Somebody I met through in my last career, and it didn't work out for them to work with the company I was with. But we had a lot of passion and excitement for animals and bettering the community, bettering husbandry, and bettering that stuff. And we recently have been talking. He's an actual herpetologist, so went to school herpetology, went and did his degree, did a bunch of herpetological stuff, and then decided he wanted to get into the pet and foods and understanding animal nutrition. So he also is an animal. So he went back to school. He's also an animal nutritionist. So like, this is the guy zoos call when they're like, we have a cheetah and it eats this, but we need to supplement it. He makes a supplement for that animal. Like, he's one of the most nutritionally knowledgeable guys I've ever met in my life. And then on top of it, I have monitors and tags who's punching lights all around me, and it sounds like I'm about to be attacked. But he's also very much about, he hates fillers. He hates all the crap that the industry does. He hates how everything is just trash, and he's on board with everything we've been talking about. And so as a pet project, he's been working on some secret, really awesome food stuff. And me and him are going to be working on some stuff together in the future that's going to change, like, what the lighting that I'm working on now is doing to the reptiles. This next section of within the next 12 months, the foods that are going to come out, and it's really going to turn things on their side a little bit, because this is not how we go at food in this industry. But it's like taking your dog from Old Roy to organic grass-fed raw.
Yeah. And that's terrific, because there's a few companies that supply, and they talk a big game about being cleaner and kinder to their rodents and raising them properly, but that's kind of it. Like, we don't have that line. I could go to the dog food section and I could get the cheapest bag possible, or I could get stuff that's I mean, basically you add salt and you could eat it.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a huge variety and a huge gap and a range. And it's like that for a lot of pets, for fish, even, you know, isopod food, you can get like some really quality stuff that's nutritionally complete. And for most of our rodents or most of our feeders, it's kind of just like, no, they're feeders. You know,
Yeah.
it's just empty calories, and we don't treat our own body like we know enough that way. Which is funny. Once I started getting into snakes was when I really stopped like drinking soda. So I was, you know, I started worrying about everything that they consume, and I was like, well, you know, that's just going into their body. And I was like, wait a second.
Yeah. Yeah. You start thinking about that. It's crazy. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
And so it's, you know, there's a lot of carryover, but vice versa too. We need that for our reptile. I think there's that. And I know you have a lot of big plans for big VivTech. And it's always exciting because there's a lot on the horizon. So I think there's a lot to keep looking for. And I think this was a great foray into it, because as you can see, I saw that it's in stores now too. So congrats on that.
Thanks. Thank you.
And it's just, as you can see, there was a demand for it. So
Yeah.
I think you hit the nail on the head with starting there, and hopefully it allows you to disrupt the rest of it, because I think there's a lot of it, and I'm glad you're doing it. No offense to you, I don't want you to be the only one doing it.
I don't either. I want anybody who has an idea, like there is a company coming out that's got something coming out, and they were at some store of people I know talking bad about Viv. I'm like, I don't even know them, and actually, I don't down talk other brands in order to promote myself.
There's other good ones. I use other good ones too.
But like, yeah, but that's the thing. I want everybody to do this. If you
Yeah.
have an idea, like, to be totally honest, I'm pitching the idea with Erica and my team about even opening up contests and stuff. If you bring me ideas that you could do, I think anybody should, and you get paid for it. Like, people should get involved. Come up with a cool idea. You want to start a company and do something, you think you have something unique, do it. Go do it. I'll help you. I'll help you. I mean, call me. I'll give you advice, whatever you need. I think all of us need to do this. I'll help grow my competition. I don't care. Like, that's the whole goal. Like, the goal is to constantly keep fighting to be better. And if I don't have competition, I don't have anybody to fight against to be better. But I'm going to fight against myself, because I'm never satisfied. But no, there needs to be innovation. There needs to be other people that care and that want to do this. And I hope that we get to a point where reptile shows are 30% product companies, and there's no big ones really, except for a couple ones that just hit up the Petcos and PetSmarts, and that's how it should be. Zilla, Zoomed, and Exoterra should keep working with Petco and PetSmart and all of the big box stores, because I don't want to. Because I've been on calls with them, and they're not going to change, and they're not bad. They're not as bad and villainous as everybody makes them out to be, but they're a big company, and they're owned by big like corporations and board members and business people. And they're not going to change. It just is what it is. So, but I'm also never going to get big enough where I'm going to have the amount of reach they have.
Yeah.
I'm never going to get, and nor do I want to get so big that I can reach every person coming into the hobby immediately. What my whole goal with VivTech was, you know what we do is I'm cool with letting those guys spend all the money and go fight tooth and nail, penny for penny, to get into those spots in those stores. And then when somebody buys their first reptile and leaves that store, that's when we kick in. That's when the rest of the hobby needs to be there. The second that they Google, we should come up. And that's where I want to see us take it from there. Oh, you know what? I don't know why I let him out. He's just crapping on my floor. Sorry, Tegu.
Yeah, they do that.
Yeah, no, he gets to walk around. He's got an 8x3 foot cage, and he gets to walk around the whole room once in a while. Oh no, cool. And then he's just dragging his butt across the floor. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
But like, I'm game. I want everybody. I want to be me and 10 other people fighting for the spot. I mean, like, of what the next coolest, best thing you can do is, because that's the only way the hobby is going to grow. It's not going to grow if we rely on the big companies, because their market isn't us. We're just a byproduct. We're a part of their market, but we're not their focal point. For a lot of these companies, more than half of, I mean, seriously, some of them, it can be anywhere from 50 to 80% of their income comes from major box stores. So they're not going to stop. They're not going to walk away and make bigger, more innovative products for us. They're never going to become Kessel, or like the Kessel of saltwater, or the VivTech of reptile. They're not going to come after that, because like you can kind of see, that's not their market. Zoom had launched an LED2, an LED UV2. They're going to have a way harder time selling that than I am, because they're going after those entry-level people, and those entry-level people aren't ready to understand that, can't handle the cost that Zoom Ed needs to have in order to get their margins and sell to Petco and go through distribution and all of those different things. The product becomes too expensive. We're marketing it to people that have a hard time with it. They're more likely to fail with it. So I don't want to fill that gap. I think that's what we need to do. I think honestly, like, appreciate those guys for what they are, let them fill that gap, and then we need to work on filling up the next levels of what husbandry is after you get in. Because right now, the same companies that we're using for our husbandry products are the same one that make the stupid basic kits we hate.
And that's why I'm so happy that you could come on. I'm hoping that's what this little interview would be able to accomplish for anyone that's stuck with us this long, is that we can bridge that gap. And I do think I want to hit 2 points real fast before we say bye. And I do think that that's one thing that we could really improve upon, is just what you said, is communicating with one another and being there for our other hobbyists. Because that secondary information market is so valuable for learning how to connect these things. It's not something you're going to get on the little fold-out brochure at Petco. But when you speak to people online, they say, oh yeah, actually, here's the reason why, here's what we can learn. And lastly, I've got a question here, but I wanted to, and I'll read that after this, I wanted to also bring up in terms of protecting and looking out for each other. I'm sure you're aware what USARK is fighting right now. And there's
tomorrow at 7 p.m.
Okay.
on Dave Kaufman's YouTube channel, me, Dave, Phil Goss, and Erica are going to do kind of a state of the union to everybody of what's going on.
Oh, great. Is it going to be a live, or?
It's a live on Dave's YouTube channel.
Awesome.
Information will get posted tonight. You should see it shortly. And then I'll post it. I'll share it. You'll be able to see it all over, share it everywhere. We're going to try and really give people an idea of what's going on. And then, yeah, sorry to let you finish what you're saying, but I just wanted to. That's good. Coming. We're big stuff coming.
That's good. So there's a lot to say on that. And that's why I say real quickly, basically where it is now, it's passed the House. There was a previous bill that passed the Senate. They're trying to determine which language from both bills gets meshed into the final bill. And what we want right now is to make sure that the language that is the amendments of the Lacey Act from 1995 that USARK sued to remove doesn't make it into the final bill, because it was added onto the House bill at the last minute. So I've sent out emails. I do recommend people to not just send out a blank copy paste of the USARK sample email, to write it specifically to your legislators. For instance, I live in a very liberal district, and the verbiage just doesn't apply to my congressperson. They wouldn't respond to it. So, I changed certain things like that. So I do recommend you be a little bit more savvy than just point and click, and I'll include links in this video too. Add emotion
to it.
Add your own.
It matters.
Yeah, be personal, talk about the city you live in, those sort of things. But I'm glad you guys are doing that too. And I know there's been a lot of it, but anyone that's listening to me, and I don't want you to think that this is like a big hobby thing. It affects, I have 5 snakes.
Every animal.
They could get rid of all of them.
This is the way that this is written. So there's a couple things, and we'll talk about all this in depth tomorrow. So anybody tune in, Dave Fossman's YouTube channel, 7 p.m. But really what it comes down to with this is this bill, we need to, this stuff's never going to go away. It's going to keep happening. This bill, as it is the same one that's actually been around. It passed last year, and it kind of just keeps getting held up. So this is the final step, but we all just need to push everybody to pay attention, listen in. And there's a couple things. One, make sure you actually follow through on the stuff that Phil asks everybody to do. And the one thing that I do want to put out there, don't support USARK. Be a member of USARK. I'm sick of the rhetoric or the terminology being, everybody support USARK. Because you know what? That's like saying everybody support healthy puppies and being able to keep your pets. Who's going to say no to that?
Yeah.
I support a lot of things. I don't fund and actively work with many things. I actively am a member of USARK. And the biggest thing I need people to understand, what I'm going to be driving tomorrow, is that I would rather have you be a member for $40 a year than donate $100 cash to Phil. And the reason that that's more valuable, it's actually more valuable than $200, is because,
but not
let's say-
250. 250 is the limit.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But like, let's say Phil rolls up because let's say USARK is $1 billion fund, and Phil rolls down Congress in his Rolls Royce gold rims golf cart to get out and talk. Even if that was the case, if he stands up and goes, I represent the 2,200 people of USARK, he's going to sound like a joke.
Yeah.
Versus if he says, I represent 500,000 reptile keepers.
Yep.
That's it. And then the other thing is with the ban, when that preliminary injunction happened where people could start shipping animals again, it was only for USARK members for the first year or two.
Yeah.
And
how about that?
You had to be a member prior to that ban happening in order to be able to be allowed to ship across state lines. So when lawsuits and things like that happen where USARK is suing the government, USARK does not represent, in the government's eyes, all reptile keepers. It represents their membership.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not a member, you're not represented. So I'm pretty sure for $5 a month that you just turn it on. It's PayPal. I don't even notice it. I don't even know if I could find on my bank statement where my donation is. Like, it's so little, I don't even notice it. And I think most people could handle $5. If you can do more, do more.
Yeah.
Like, and some people say, well, I give every time I ship an animal, I click the button with ship your reptiles. Well, 7 out of people literally actually uncheck that box. That's a statistic from Ship Your Reptiles. It's an automatically checked box that you have to actively uncheck to donate $1 of that $90 shipment to USARK, and 7 out of 10 people uncheck it. Like, this is the stuff that's killing us.
Yeah.
But like, that's where we've got to get people to realize, like, being a member and being a part of something bigger is how we're saving it, not just supporting it and telling them we appreciate what they do.
Be a member.
Like sending thoughts and prayers.
Yeah.
It's a good thought, but it doesn't really actually do anything.
Yeah, no, it's empty. Be a member. If you're selling reptiles, sell it to members, or take extra money and sign them up. Or if you're buying a reptile, buy it from breeders who are members. It's not hard to ask, and it tells you a lot about someone when they refuse to do it. And it's I don't. Anyway, that's another topic. But
we give discounts to USARK members, and I've had someone at a show calculate out that it was way cheaper for them to go get a USARK membership than it was to pay full price.
Yeah.
So there's easy things we can do. Like, hey, USARK members get 10% off these snakes. Guess what? If I came up to you and tried to negotiate the sale of a snake at a show, and I was like, look, you want 500, would you do 450? There's not many people who are going to be like, get out of here. Don't talk to me.
Yeah.
Like, you would do it. So how about instead you just take that and you don't. You would do that anyway, so just say you do it for USARK members.
Right.
We need to incentivize the behavior we want.
That's it.
Like kids and puppies.
Behaviorism.
I'm gonna give all these little reptile hobbyists treats until they do what we need them to do.
I do have one more question, UV related.
Right.
This comes from one of the viewers. They want to know how to pick the right UV light for, let's say, a specific animal morph. So something that's an albino or a scaleless or a hypo. Would you want to go with the same intense UV? And this is a really good question. Same intense UV light, or is it safe to use the same intensity you would use for normal individuals of the same species? Nice, really easy closeout question for you.
I'm not like on stage at like giving a presentation. That's a hell of a closer, man.
Good question.
What would you do about the stuff that no one's ever thought about? No, when it comes to stuff like that, really, I would say start out with the same thing that you give in a normal variant of that animal, and then watch their behavior. Like when it comes to scaleless is one I would probably just back down, period, because scales are a part, especially when you're talking, I guess, like it said, again, it kind of depends. Like if you're talking bearded dragons, yeah, I would tone it back because that could really wreck a beardy. At the same time, if you're talking corn snakes, they're pretty good at moving in and out of it, and they're not as dependent on it. So I don't know that losing their scales would make that heavy of a difference in their absorption. I mean, it would obviously make a difference, but I think due to their behaviors, I think it'd be less likely that they would overdo it or harm themselves because they're not constant baskers. So I think you kind of got to put a lot of that stuff into thought. It really comes down to, for me, is just watching them and keeping an eye on them. You'll notice if an animal's uncomfortable, they'll stay away from the light. They won't bask as regularly. Their eating behaviors will change, things like that. But yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be opposed to ramping it up. The one thing I would say too is when it comes to it, don't forget that like these animals can see the light and we can't. The reason that we launched spotlights and not tubes, which all these people are freaking out because we didn't do tubes, and tubes are the only way to do it. And I've been told that a tube is more like the sun, but a coil will kill you. And I'm like, no, they're literally the same thing. I know because we manufacture them. Anyway, but when it comes to UV spotlights, I hate tubes. I hate full coverage UV because it's stupid. Because nowhere, even in the wild, yes, there's full coverage UV. Yes, there's full coverage. When you're standing in a field, looking at a field of leaves and jungle and plants and things, there is light on everything. Those animals don't live on the surface of every leaf and every plant you're looking at. They live in rocks and holes and all over the place. So, like, yeah, I mean, they'll find what they need. So create a spot, give them a gradient, and allow them to find their way through the gradient, and then pay attention to the behavior changes. When it comes to morphs and stuff like that, or any unique ones, that's the best I think I can do right now. There's some studies that show like the UV absorption through different types of skin. That would probably be, to be totally honest, that'd probably be a good place to start, just to kind of start really chewing on that idea. Which, thank you for that question, because now I'm not going to sleep and I need to figure out the answer. But no, it's a good question. I think that there's definitely some morphs that you'd be a little bit more aware of it. Like I said, silky beardies would be a big one. Any kind of a scaleless lizard or albino lizard that's generally a very high UV need lizard, I'd probably scaleless. I would worry about. Albino, not so much, because albino takes out the melanin, which can affect them. But their skin structure and the structures in their skin that reflect the UV are still mostly going to be there. So I don't think it would be as detrimental. Plus, the other thing too is if you use a spotlight with those guys with the parietal eye and their vision of UV, they'll move themselves away from it and to it as they need it. But you may see something like say a silky beardy may not go as close to the UV light as some of your other ones, and that would be a good way to just anecdotally say, okay, when it's basking, it's not utilizing as intense of a light because it's not as close to the center of the spot. Like there's things like that, but I honestly, I don't know that I have a good answer other than just anecdotally kind of piecing together some of those things and making some kind of hypothesis of what would happen. But and I'm not sure if there's any studies out there yet either on it, but there are some stuff there. So try stuff, see what you can figure out. And like, it really comes down to watch their behaviors. And when it comes to fluorescent, and it's not about buying my bulb. I don't care. I wish everybody had one, because the changes in the behavior from the UVA, it really is unreal. I feel like a snake oil salesman when I'm talking about it.
You are,
because like I know, but like you know what I mean. Like it just seems like I can't. Like I feel like a used car salesman when I tell the story about like my monitor literally freezing in his tracks, turning 90 degrees, and going and analyzing his basking spot like he'd never seen it before. Like, and that was all I did was flip on a switch. Nothing else changed. Like, it's hard to see that stuff and not get really excited, but then not also feel like I'm a little crazy when I say it, because I've never seen an animal react to UV in artificially ever. Doesn't matter whether it's mercury vapor, metal halide, any of them. At the same time, none of them cover as much of the UVA spectrum as this LED does.
Well, and that's awesome. I think that's a fantastic place to end it, because that I feel like has a message that we've seen is just watch it and see what happens.
Relate it back to the wild too. Anytime you hit something in husbandry, somebody tells you something and you're like, I get people who come to me like, this person said this and it just sounds weird. And I'm like, well, if it sounds weird, you're probably on the right track. Think about, okay, where in that animal's daily life in the wild for the last million years where does it run into this thing I'm doing? What scenario am I creating that I'm trying to artificially create for them or avoid for them? What is this thing doing? And if it's something like you should tile your bearded dragon's tank because they'll get impacted, well, Australia's not tile, and it never has been. And if they were going to get impacted and die every time they lived on sand, they'd be extinct. Now, granted, we want to do better than the options they have in the wild, but still everybody, if you think about it for a minute, it doesn't make sense. And then if you start to dig into it, you find out it's because impaction is a secondary condition to a primary sickness. It's not the primary reason for any animal dying ever. It's almost always a secondary issue. So like things like that, like just continue to think, how does this make sense to how an animal lives in the wild? And if it doesn't, start asking questions.
Start asking questions. That's I love that. That's, I think, is the ethos of everything I try and do. I don't know all these things. That's why I have this channel. I don't have this channel so that people can hear what I have to say. I have this channel so that I can ask questions of people who know. And with that being said, Ryan, it was a pleasure having you on, telling people what you know. I do wish you the best of success with the company, you and Erica, because I know you guys work tirelessly to bring that information to us and to make it accessible to the hobby. I'll be tuning in, whether it's live at the moment with Dave or after the fact. So I'll definitely watch that, and I recommend everyone else do too. Anything else you want to get out before we say goodbye and say goodnight?
Not really. I just implore everybody to start thinking critically. Think about your husbandry and analyze. Go back to, in the wild, this animal on this stick. How does that make sense? Microhabitats, microclimates, gradients in everything: heat gradient, humidity gradient, light intensity gradient, UVA gradient, UVB gradient. All of those things, give them as much as they can and allow them to do what they've evolved for millions of years to do. And let's all stop being so egotistical that we think we know better than they do.
Brilliant. I love it. Thank you, Ryan McVeigh, for joining us. Thank you to the folks that watch this live. Until then, we'll see you on the next one. All right. Have a great night.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.